What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition, episode 20 of the Vicktory Life Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, former all-conference offensive lineman Dwight Vick, founder and owner of Vicktory Life, and I'm also here with my other co-host, Danny Nokes, 1067 is the fans own, as well as my guy that produced me when I was doing the color commentating for the spring game back in 2013. My guy, Hokie alumni, Danny Nokes, man. What's good with you, boss?
Not much, man. We've come a long way since then, haven't we? It's good to
Yo,
be
we
with you,
have.
though.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. So before we jumped on, you were telling me you've been battling COVID, man. So you're good. You're getting better, right?
Yeah, I feel a lot better than when we were recording our segment with your cousin Mike last weekend. That was when I was probably at my worst. But yeah, I'm feeling much better. I've got most of the congestion out. I'm getting my smell and my taste back, which was the weirdest
Wow,
thing
that's the
to
weirdest
to
thing.
to not be able to smell or taste anything. But it's all good, man. I'm feeling a lot better. So let's rock and roll.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's jump into it because we got Andy Bitter jumping on here in about 10 minutes, man. The great Andy Bitter. So I can't wait to hear his thoughts. But we have the Vic 757 show talking all things tech. You and I will be on that later this week. But I thought we could jump into our show and talk a little tech football. And great because we get to talk about a tech win.
Hmm.
Boston College, they beat Boston College, their home opener, ACC opener, 27-10. The defense was lights out. And it was just great. A lot of tech fans, a lot of us were really anxious, apprehensive, nervous, a lot of negative talk, which I thought was a bit premature and unfair because typically, first year head coach in regards to Brent Pry, new staff, a lot of moving pieces. And yet fans were already saying, you know what, it's over the season. This is going to be a rebuild, which it still is. But that doesn't mean you can't win 6, 7, or maybe slip up and get an eighth win. But I was glad to see Tech win, especially against a team in Boston College we lost to last year, a team, that is a team you have to beat, a quality opponent, man. But what were your thoughts?
I was just glad to see us get a win, much like everybody else was. In Hokie Nation, we take no wins for granted anymore. Not with the state of the program that Justin Fuente
No.
left us in. And all things considered, I think that fans should be pretty encouraged by what they saw in the win over Boston College because I thought that there was a lot of resiliency. In the past, I think under Justin Fuente, after a big loss like that on the road against an ODU team, you would have seen him mail it in, and that's not the case with what we saw under Brent Pry on Saturday night. I thought that they came out with a lot of intensity. They came out with a turnover on one of the first plays of the game. I think it was the second pass of the game, and so that quickly put the fans into a frenzy and gave them some momentum, which it took them a minute to cash in that touchdown, didn't it?
Yeah.
But once they finally punched it in, I think that was the confidence that they needed to know, hey, we're going to be fine. We can compete in the ACC. We can win ACC games. Last week is behind us. Now it's time to start building on what we can make this season out of. And I think that there was a lot to be encouraged by.
Yeah, you and I addressed it on the Vic 757 show, talking all things tech about Grant Wells and whether he should be benched. I think one thing I've learned, even back when I played at Virginia Tech, is the Virginia Tech quarterback position will always be scrutinized. And it's a position in sports, especially in college and pro, in which we look at differently than a receiver, running back, offensive lineman, a center, a defensive back. We will call for a player to be benched or taken out. But with the quarterback, we have always, many times, unfair expectations. And what I'm saying is, I'm not saying Grant Wells should not be held accountable, and I definitely thought he didn't play a great game at ODU. But I feel like I'll say this, and I can't wait to talk to Andy about this. I think when you're looking at building a program, what Brent Pry is doing, we can't judge him and his staff by the sins of the past regime.
Right.
We can't even judge him against Beamer's regime and his era and staff. Because what'll happen is over the next several weeks and even into next season, as fans, observers, sports writers, alumni, we will begin to get a better feel for what Pride will do in certain situations. Meaning we knew how Beamer, Foster, Wildstein, Spring, the whole crew did their thing. We even had a great understanding what Fuente was going to do with his staff or not do. Pry, we're still seeing how he makes adjustments. We're still seeing how him and his staff handle adversity. We're going to see how Tyler Bowen calls plays. A great example of was that, listen, and I know you were feeling it because I was watching at home. The fans were feeling it. We got out to that great lead. King has that great run for a touchdown. We're up 17-0, sacking the quarterback. Then all of a sudden we hit a wall, and BC made some adjustments. Zay Flowers got off a little bit. Next thing you know, it's 17-10. And I tweeted, you got to show some guts offense and throw the ball down the field. Right after I tweeted that, we get the ball back. We got an answer because Boston College is coming back and we're having memories of the Matt Ryan years. And then, sure enough, man, Grant Wells goes deep to Smith. And next thing you know, he throws a touchdown pass. And, Caleb Smith catches the touchdown pass and a long pass. And we're back up 24-10. And I thought it was a great answer. And I think that it's a reminder that we don't really know what to expect. But I think right now it's safe to say that Pry has a good feel for the game, and his staff, we got to be a little bit more patient.
I think so too. And also I think what went into part of the reason why Virginia Tech stalled after going up 17-0 was when Keyshawn King left the game due to an injury. And I don't know if we saw him after that big long run that he had there in the second quarter,
No.
and he was obviously the workhorse in the game against ODU. I commended the Virginia Tech coaching staff for, despite falling behind in that game and for playing from behind for a lot of the ODU game, they never abandoned the run. And they got Keyshawn King up over 100 yards, and he was one of the most consistent things about the offense in that game. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of him against BC, because you can only imagine after that big long run what numbers he could have put up. But I like everything that you're saying, because I think what we've seen so far from Pry and his staff is that they can make adjustments. And, it took some time after they did stall in this game against BC to really get it going again. But like you said, once they finally opened up the playbook, put a little bit of extra confidence in Grant Wells, let him try and go make a play, he did that. He didn't make quite as many poor decisions, I thought, in this game against BC. It wasn't perfect, but there were less bad decisions. And I think that's good. That's a step forward. That's improvement. And if you could see that from every single person in your starting lineup, then you're certainly going to have a better product at the end of the year than the one that you started the year with. So I was very pleased with it from that standpoint. And there was a little bit of adversity there in against BC as well, because like you said, there was that looming feeling that they were going to get us again, just like they did with the Matt Ryan game back in 2007. It didn't seem to rain quite as much as we expected it to. Not maybe more towards the end of the game. The skies really started to open up. But I just, I'm trying to take everything with a grain of salt watching this team this year, because the defense is really good. And I think they're playing with, they're playing with a lot of passion right now. They're playing with a lot of intensity. Dax Hollifield is all over the field, and he's seemingly made some pretty considerable improvements. It's great to have a defensive mind like Brent Pry leading the team, because that's certainly the strength of this team, and they're going to have to rely on that defense to make stops if they're going to get to the point where they want to be at the end of the year.
Yeah, and just to piggyback, because we're getting ready to bring Andy Bitter on of the Athletic to join us to break down the Tech win over Boston College. But I think what's also critical is that we take care and build on wins. As I said to you on our show, and even when you're on 106.7 The Fan, Tech has to start winning games they're supposed to win, right? Boston College, after that ODU loss, I wouldn't have said it was a game they were supposed to win, but I felt that they should win that game. I like, all being at home. Boston College is a program. They got a good team. I know they're 0-2 right now, but it's a team that, they're always a solid program. Some years they're very, very good. And I think, Wofford, obviously, they haven't even scored yet this season, and they're playing a top 5 defense in Virginia Tech. And then ODU was a game I thought they should have won. So I think it's a lesson learned in that. And unfortunately, Virginia Tech fans know all too well, we've learned a lot of lessons. But I feel like you beat Wofford, because that would be the worst upset in college football history if we lost that game. It would be awful. But okay, we win that game.
Mhm.
Now you have West Virginia coming in at 0-2. They gave up that crazy stat in which they lost by 13 in overtime, which is hard to do because they were down one and they threw a pick six.
Pick six.
But they're 0-2, and they're a good offensive team. But defensively, you got them, and then you face North Carolina. Neither defenses can stop me at a receiver. So, I mean, you got some games you can win. I'm going to take the old school approach and focus one game at a time. And I'm just going to just focus on seeing this team improve week to week, because I feel like that's the measuring stick and the baseline we ought to give Coach Pry and the offense. But joining this show is one of my guys. I always jump on his stuff, so I finally can get him on this one. Andy Bitter of The Athletic joins us, man. One of my favorite journalists. I've been reading stuff for years, covers Virginia Tech, also loves to throw shade when he can. No, you one of my guys. Andy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Dwight. I think I've interviewed you like 12 times for articles that I've written. So I'm overdue to come on this. To be fair, this is the first time you've asked me. It's not like I've been like, no, I'm too busy. I can't
Well,
get
yeah.
on. So
I
first chance you asked, I'm like, yes,
yeah.
I'll do this.
Yes. And well, I gotta get you on. We got you on this one. We'll probably have you on again, and I gotta get you on with me, Danny, and Mike on that one too, because that's a great podcast as well. And I'm glad you can jump on. Like I said, I've been reading your stuff. I actually have the last article you did with me and Mike talking about the Vicks and the West Virginia rivalry and everything you did several months ago. So I actually have two articles framed by you in my basement hanging up, man. So
There you
we
go.
got that.
Pretty
Let's
good.
add to the
Yeah.
list. Let's
Yeah,
get
yeah,
going.
yeah, yeah. I've been with Andy, man. So I'm, he's just my guy, man. Andy, Danny and I welcome you to the show, man. I wanted you on because I really do value. I read your stuff all the time. I want your thoughts, man. I know ODU is a few weeks ago, but I'd like to ask you your thoughts about what you saw at ODU, and then two-parter. What do you think they really did well as far as Virginia Tech beating Boston College?
Well, they didn't really do anything well in the opener, other than play defense for 3.5 quarters. Like, I don't want to throw complete shade at this team. I mean, you probably look at the expected win outcomes. I think I look at Bill Connolly's S&P Plus, and they win that game 75% of the time. But the turnovers and the mistakes they made on special teams, and ODU completes a couple passes there at the end and ends up winning the game. It was a pretty rough way to start the Brent Pry era. But I tried to caution this in some of my writing, and I go, you know what, week one is weird sometimes, and coaching debuts are weird sometimes. Sometimes it just takes a while to get going. Remember when Chip Kelly started at Oregon? They played that game at Boise State. They had like 100 yards and they got embarrassed. And then LeGarrette Blunt punched a guy after it's like the
Punch the guy
worst
in the
game.
face.
It's
I
like the
remember that.
worst game. I remember the fans were like ready to fire Chip Kelly after that. And one guy complained, and like Chip Kelly wrote him a personal check to cover the expenses of going to Boise for it. I think things turned out okay for Chip Kelly. So I wanted to caution to take some patience with this whole thing. And I had my doubts about this team after the opener, and I think I feel a little bit better about this team after seeing them against Boston College. This defense looks legit. I don't know if there are any stars on this defense, but they're playing together. They're playing aggressive and relentless, and it just seems like there's a good defensive plan out there. Special teams has been all right. I feel like they have a kicker, they have a punter. That's two big things there. If they can figure out this return game, they're probably in the right spot there. And then offensively, they kind of are what they are. I don't think it's going to be an explosive offense. I don't see a ton of playmakers in this group. I would hope that Malachi Thomas comes back and he gives you a real lift in the running game, but some questions about the offensive line, and not a ton of depth there. And I didn't feel like they were opening up a bunch of holes against BC, but they did enough offensively when you play defensively like that. And if you play good defense and good special teams, we've seen it for how many years at Virginia Tech now? 30 plus years that you can win a lot of football games that way. So, I think you go from the two extremes. If you're a fan of the Hokies, is you're just completely dejected after that ODU opener. You go, man, this is going to be a long season, to beating BC, which BC might not be that great of a team, let's be honest, but they look pretty good and sharp in that game. You can see a path to competing against some of these, teams in the ACC that aren't exactly putting it all together right now. So, just take some time, take a breath. I think that's what you have to do in this first month of the season, because this team's not going to be what it is at the end of the year, I think.
I was going to say, Andy, the BC, yeah, they might not look very good as a unit on either side of the ball. They were kind of disheveled in several instances in this game. But Phil Jurkovic is not a bad quarterback, and Zay Flowers is a great playmaker. They really had a couple of opportunities that the Hokies were lucky that they missed on in that game. There were some guys that were open down the field. So to overcome some of that, and I look at the performance from Grant Wells, where, you know, coming off of all the turnovers he had against ODU, he comes back into this game. I saw significant improvement, I thought, at least from his decision making. He's the type of quarterback, though, that I think you're going to have to live and die a little bit with, letting him just sling it a little bit, let him get the ball around the field. Dwight and I were talking right before you came on. The offense was stalling a little bit until they hit that big pass play to Caleb Smith later on in the game. So I saw steady improvement, and that has to be somewhat encouraging.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned Dracovic and Flowers; those guys are good. It was a paper mache offensive line that they were playing behind, though. I mean, Dwight, you had to be watching that, just go, what happened to Boston College? This is like O-line U, and just guys that they thrown through there. And I know they had an injury, Christian Mahogany, in the preseason. He was probably an all ACC caliber player. They have a bunch of turnover, but man, I don't know if Drakovic's going to make it through the year with that kind of protection. And, you know, not to discredit Virginia Tech, they put pressure on him, but I think that O-line was pretty rough there. In terms of Grant Wells, yeah, I think he made enough plays the other day. He certainly didn't throw the game away, and I think that was the case in the opener. And, you know, not all those interceptions were him. There's one that bounces off Jalen Holston's hands, and at the end, you're just trying to make something happen. You have to do that and throw it down the field at that point. But I think he was better with his decisions. He didn't really put the ball in harm's way. That's a pretty good pass defense that BC has. That's been a top 10 pass defense the last 2 years. So maybe that's something that they didn't want to risk once they get up 17-0. They're like, oh, let's just kind of put in a shell at this point and not lose this game at this point. So I think Grant was solid in that game. I still need to see him sort of elevate this offense and make the throws to receivers down the field and really push the ball downfield consistently. And right now, I don't know if he can go out and win this team a game. I think he's got that capability. He hasn't shown it yet, but he did show that he can avoid losing a game like he did against BC, and doing enough for the defense and the running game to carry the day.
Yeah, Andy, one of the things I've hated since, and maybe when I played, I said this, but since I've done playing football and I've done more of the media stuff and podcasting and radio shows, one thing I hate is when fans say, oh man, look at this schedule. This is an easy schedule. I've gotten a lot of heated debates here lately, even before the season started, when people looked at this schedule and, in previous years, oh, this is a favorable schedule. I'll go with favorable. But when I hear this schedule is this schedule is that, you mentioned week ones are tricky. I've always felt, especially being a Tech fan, we've had moments when we won games that we surprised ourselves with, and then we lost games, so many of them when we were favored or we should have won by 2 touchdowns. When I look at this schedule, a lot was made out, oh, this is a favorable schedule. It is, but at the same time, when I look at West Virginia coming up after Wofford, because Wofford obviously got to respect your opponent, but they haven't scored a touchdown in 2 weeks. You have West Virginia, which is now 0-2. I think they should be 1-2 when they come to Blacksburg on Thursday night. But that is a high-powered offense. Now, their defense is not good at all. It hasn't really been good. And there's rumors, and I heard a show coming in about their coach being on the hot seat. And then you have UNC, which, they escaped Appalachian State, and they gave up 40 points in a quarter. And the funny thing is, really since entering the ACC, Virginia Tech has owned UNC. Even during the Fuente era, he was 5-1. But with that being said, I'm going to get to my question. UNC, Pitt, Miami, NC State. I know we got to look at Wofford and West Virginia and UNC. Those are the more recent games coming up. But when you look at the schedule, what should be the expectations for Virginia Tech fans? Because Pry and them are going to try to expect to win every game, and they're going to want to do that. But when it comes to a realistic outlook, not the entire schedule, but the games I just mentioned, what should be the expectation?
After seeing this team the first 2 weeks, I don't really know. I mean, you lose to a Sun Belt team, then come back and look really sharp at home against what could possibly be the worst team in the ACC. And we'll see how Georgia Tech plays out. Duke looks a lot better than it's been in recent years, but BC might be way down there. So I don't want to take that win and go, oh man, everything's right in Hokie Nation. But that's a tough stretch. And it's a tough stretch because you go West Virginia rivalry game. It can get pretty heated.
Yes.
I don't need to tell you. I don't need to tell you, Dwight. It gets pretty heated. You can kind of throw the records out sometimes. I feel like at 0-2, possibly 1-2 coming into that. That's going to be a desperate team. That's always a tough thing to go up against when the other team is really aching for a win. But after that, I mean, UNC doesn't play defense, but that offense is spectacular. Pitt, has this team ever played well at Pitt? It doesn't feel like it. It's just a place. It's like a house.
Not even since I played. Not even when I played.
Even when the team's like really good, Pitt was a tough out up there. Miami might be the best team in the Coastal. We'll see. They're playing pretty well. We'll see what they're made of this week against Texas A&M. NC State after that. I mean, I picked them to win the ACC. I don't feel great about that pick right now, but that's a good team. That's a tough defense. Got a really good quarterback. But you never know with these games. I mean, we pick all these games the preseason. I think I picked them to lose. I picked them to beat West Virginia and then lose the 4 games after that. But you don't know. I mean, I tried to do the preseason predictions for VT Scoop, and they put the graphic up, of course, and they got the logos and all the games. And I picked Virginia Tech to lose to Duke. And people lost their minds about it. They're like, we're not going to lose to Duke. That's absurd. If you read the article in the explanation, I said, this is sort of a stand-in for that what they lost to who game that Virginia Tech seems to have every year. And I mentioned in there, it's like between ODU, Duke, Georgia Tech, and Liberty, I just don't feel confident that this team is going to beat all 4 of those teams. And little did I know what would happen in the opener with ODU. But I mean, that's the type of thing where you look at these games before the season, you go, that's a win, loss, win, loss, win, loss. And people get upset if you don't just pick them straight by who they're supposed to beat and who to lose to. But in reality, there's emotions and there's week-to-week variance. And sometimes you just don't show up in a week. And sometimes you get really motivated, perhaps to beat a North Carolina team that's, there's some bad blood between these 2 programs there. It feels like Virginia Tech really enjoys getting up and beating North Carolina.
Oh, it does. Yes.
So it's just other things that you can't factor in. So I hesitate to say what is the expectation there, other than to say I think that's a really tough stretch of the schedule. And I think if they even go 2-3 through that stretch, that might be considered an accomplishment. Because like I said in the preseason, I picked them to lose quite a few of those games. So it's tough to extrapolate an entire season based on 2 games like that. But the way this defense has been playing, I give them a much better chance than I did previously, because I think that's a pretty solid unit on that side of the ball.
Well, hold on. And Danny, hold on before you hit Andy with your question. What's funny is I didn't tweet this, but I was talking to my son who's 16, and I was explaining to him, I said, people talk about Michael Vick and Brian Randall, and even you can throw in Tyrod, but especially during my era with Al Clark and Jim Druckenmiller, that was the formula of how we won 10, 11, 9 games. It was methodical offense, running the ball on 3rd and 6, tall sweeps, play action passes. It was defense carrying the torch. As a matter of fact, you and I, Andy, are part of that Beamer special that's coming out in October, talking about Beamer ball. And you mentioned, I saw a little sneak peek. You mentioned how we won games scoring, and Beamer ball is actually scoring in all 3 phases.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, that's what you saw really against Boston College, and to some degree, even though it was a loss with ODU. So interesting how this might be the blueprint this season. I don't want to, we don't know. But Danny, I know you have a question for Andy.
Yeah, well, I'm just a little jealous that you got the sneak peek on the Beamer ball, Doc. Whatever's going on there, I want to definitely check that thing out.
I just want to get like some FaceTime in it. Like I wasn't gonna like bring it up to people in case I was just left on the cutting room floor.
No, you in there,
my guy. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be on this Beamer thing, and then it's just like no footage of me whatsoever.
Nah, my guy, the guy, he shot me a little clip. It looks good. It was like just a minute, and you were first, Andy, and then again that was 4 weeks ago. So but no, it was actually cool. It was
Let's
good.
hope it
It's good
holds
how that
up,
went.
man. Let's hope it
Yeah, I
holds
was gonna
up.
say, so there's still a chance to cut you out, buddy.
Yeah.
No,
Somebody got a final cut on it and like, get this guy out of here. We need more Dwight Vick on this.
well, you know what's funny too, guys, is we before the season opened up last week, before we played that ODU game, I broke the schedule down into thirds, Andy, and I think that's pretty much the easiest way to look at it because you have a favorable stretch to open the season. You've got your toughest stretch right in the middle of the season where you're going to play your toughest games, a couple of ranked teams. And then the last 4 games are sort of more favorable, but you've got a couple of in-state rivalry matchups against Liberty, against UVA. And not that any of those other games that aren't Liberty and UVA should be counted as wins either, but to come out and to lose to ODU in the season opener and flip it around and win your ACC opener, it's kind of like you said, it's tough to judge where this team is going to go. Now, I'm curious over the next 2 weeks because this is still from what I see, and it'll really leave the favorable part of the schedule when you go to West Virginia because you could just that's a toss-up game with the rivalry matchup that it is. But you know, Keyshawn King leaving this game, they kept feeding him the ball against ODU, and I keep praising the coaching staff for not abandoning the run despite falling behind in that Old Dominion game and sticking to it. He had a good game, and then he had that big busted long run against Boston College this weekend. Now we don't know how long he's going to be out, but Malachi Thomas being factored in here. I'm curious as to what Tyler Bowen and the offense might do to kind of keep that trend going because this is it looks a lot different than what we're used to seeing under Fuente.
Yeah, I don't know how the running back situation is going to sort out. I would doubt that you would see Malachi Thomas this week. And they keep saying he's a fast healer. It's like you don't need him for Wofford.
Right.
All right. Let him rest up. And then on top of that, you have a short week before you play West Virginia. You don't want him to be, worn down at all if that's your target date for him getting back. And I look at Keyshawn King kind of in the same way. I don't know how nicked up he was. I know he didn't play in the second half the other night, but you want those guys to be at peak performance and peak health, or as close to peak health as you can when the meat of the schedule comes up. So if it's Jalen Holston and Chance Black and Bryce Duke possibly carrying the load against Wofford, I think they can be fine with that. But I think more importantly, they have to be creative in ways that they're going to run the ball. I don't know if that was by design against Boston College in the second 2.5 quarters of that game, basically, where I don't know if BC was just selling out to the run. I haven't gone back and watched the game or anything like that. It just did not seem like they were moving people off the line very well or being very creative with any of their runs, just kind of running straight in the middle and there's nothing there over and over and over. So
yes.
it feels like I don't know if maybe they were holding back a little bit, but there's got to be some more creativity with this offense because I don't think I like the starting 5 that they have. I don't think it's as good as the offensive lines they've had in some recent years. And that's not too much of a slight. I mean, you talk about Christian Darrisaw and Hoffman and Lacita Smith. And these are guys that are either NFL stars in Darrisaw's case or NFL rostered or in Brock's case on a practice squad. I mean, they had a lot of NFL guys come through here. I don't think the Lions quite of that caliber. So maybe if you're just counting on them to clear holes in a traditional way, that's not going to get the job done. And, I don't know how much you show against Wofford. You probably try to be pretty vanilla on that, but I think they better have a good plan coming up against West Virginia.
Yeah, Andy, you were there covering Beamer. You were there for the 5 or 6 years. Justin Fuente was there. Now we have Brent Pry, who I make no secrets on any platform I'm on. I am biased. I've known Pry since I was a youngin. When he was there as a GA, I was there with him 3 years, and I remember him very well. Then I followed him up to Penn State, and I was happy to see him doing well. I knew he was killing it in recruiting. I knew kids that went up there and were recruited by him. He's brought a lot of energy to Tech. I mean, of course, fans were very mad after the ODU loss, saying, it's one thing to do all these interviews, hugging and kissing babies and everything, but we got to get wins. But with that being said, bringing the lunch pail back, reconnecting with guys like myself, the alumni, all the guys from all the different eras, making the program more accessible. I'm not going to ask you if you think he's the right guy. That would be really unfair because, he's 2 games in. I know I feel that way. But with that being said, can you point out just some things he's done from a coaching standpoint, running a program, being a CEO of a program that I know you can't say impressed, but that you feel like is really huge in getting this program on the right track?
I just feel like there's a general excitement about him personally, that he's just sort of
Mhm.
has this energy, and everything is fun. And that's not to say that they don't work. I mean, they put in the work and they grind and everything like that, but they also take some time to enjoy it. And even just little things like addressing the crowd in a post game tweet or something
That was
like
good.
that, or
Yeah.
they've talked about relationships and recruiting again. He's just a lot more personable, doesn't mind doing that kind of stuff. And then I think he understands why he was hired and where that things were lacking from his predecessor. That just wasn't Fuente's thing. He just was not as outgoing of a guy. I mean, it's easy things like just having a little bit of fun, not treating a press conference like it's like you're being water tortured or something like that. I mean, it just did not. It's always so combative, and maybe Pride will get that way. I'm sure he'll get testy at some point in the post
Oh
game.
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's just a little more energetic and positive, and it feels like there's some fun around the program again. And I don't know if this was just a function of Fuente's job status the last couple of years. I'm sure that contributed to it. There's this sort of this black cloud that was hanging over the program. But even before that, it just seems like so many people wanted to leave, and so many people just weren't enjoying themselves. And like, he sort of had this gruff sideline demeanor that it just like didn't even like smile. It just didn't seem like he was having fun. And if he's not having fun, it doesn't feel like the players are going to have fun. And he was sort of caught between that. He sort of have that old school mentality. I think that's how he was brought up and coached. So that's how he was going to coach on the sideline. Damn it. That's how it was going to go. And
Right.
I just don't know if
Mhm.
that plays in today's game. And you look it down at South Carolina and Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer's having fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again,
Big
that's
time.
not to say they're not working, but he's enjoying things and he's relating to players. And I think in this age of the transfer portal, you have to do that. You can't be this, you know, tough nosed, hard, gruff guy with these players. I just don't think it plays with today's era. And
Mm-mm.
Pry's not like that. And I think you stretch back to his former players at Penn State. A lot of them speak very nicely of him. And I'm sure there's some that don't, because every coach has
Yeah.
some players they didn't get along with, or vice versa. But a lot of them are just like, man, he was just a really fun coach and a good guy to be around, and feel like he really cared for us. And well, I feel like some players said it about Fuente. I feel like a lot of them didn't. So I think that's the biggest difference right now. We'll see if that holds up, because everything was sunshine and roses after the first 2 years under Fuente, when they were winning games, and they're like, oh, the perfect successor to Frank Beamer, the perfect
Yeah.
marriage with Bud Foster, and then it all fell off a cliff in 2018. So you're right. I'm not going to come out and say this is the right hire after 2 games.
No, I wouldn't even do
I
that
th-
to you.
but I think in this sense, I do see some improvements in certain areas that make this program a little more fun, a little more accessible, and a little bit more on the right path in today's age.
He
Yeah.
wears it on his sleeve, and I think that's one of the things that not just his players notice, but obviously the fans are noticing. Talk about this palpable hype that's been building around the program. It kind of got a slash to it last week when they lost to ODU, but you watched him run out of the tunnel against BC to enter Sandman for the first time. He had both arms in the air. I've never seen a coach quite that fired up to run out of the field to enter Sandman. Fuente was never that fired up, and Frank he was just kind of used to it. I think at
I
that
think
point.
Frank was more concerned about getting run over by the
Yeah,
players. By the end
probably.
there, he would get out of the tunnel and he would just take like a hard right once he got past the cadets out there. He's like, I am not getting trampled on national TV on this thing. So
He knew his limits. He was smart to do that.
Pry is a little more spry in that sense. He's got a little bit more maneuverability once he gets out of there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is too, in a lot of ways, I think that Brent Pry's job is going to be a lot harder than Justin Fuentes was. And it's not to say that Fuentes wasn't hard, because following a legend like Frank Beamer was going to be a just tremendous mountainous task to do, and to come in and with an early ACC championship berth, it looked all well and good, sunshine and roses like you were saying, but obviously it changed very quickly, and now Pry is kind of charged with cleaning up a lot of what Fuente left behind, but also coming into a new landscape to college football, if you ask me, where, you know, there's a lot of conference realignment talk, and there's a lot of it's already happening. We know that with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, and UCLA and moving over to the Big Ten, you know, and USC moving to the Big Ten. So you know, not to mention NIL, right? That's another thing for him to figure out. But like you said, he's maintaining a positive attitude through it, and I think that is, you know, one of the biggest things that you can do at this point.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, you know, this program hasn't been the same in 10 years, and people are always, oh, Fuente crashed the Corvette. It's like, hold on now. Those last 4 years under Frank weren't exactly cruising along at a high altitude there. And I'm not.
You're speaking truth. No, you are being
I'm
no.
not.
I've
I'm
said
not
that. Go
trying to
ahead.
detract from Frank. I'm just saying things changed around 2010.
Yes.
And you know, you look at who got hired around then. Saban at Alabama, and he got the Death Star focused. And all of a sudden, money became a lot more important in college football. And these giant staffs and these recruiting staffs and everything that's associated with it. I feel like things changed a lot. And, you know, you have a coach somewhere for 30 years like Frank was. It's tough to adapt like that, especially near the end. And I don't feel like Virginia Tech adapted very well. They're really slow to get on the recruiting department side of things. You know, the money side, they had to get the fundraising going. That's still a process right now. They couldn't hire, you know, couldn't pay coaches as much as other schools did, couldn't hire as many guys as they could. And that's sort of what Fuente walked into. And I'm not saying Fuente elevated the program there. He struggled with it. He fought for some of these positions and, yeah, you know, didn't make the greatest hires in some situations, and that really hurt him. And as I mentioned before, the relationship side of things, he just struggled with it. Yeah. So it's been like a decade where this program has not really been hitting on all cylinders. And it makes me wonder, is there something more systemic to Virginia Tech than just who's in charge of the program? Then you add the NIL piece onto it. Brent Pry talks about relationships and getting back in these high schools in Virginia and know that we're there for them. And that's great. And you have to do that. And sometimes that's a differentiator if all things are equal. But if some other school comes over the top with, we're going to give you $200,000 too, well, that's not a very tough decision if I'm a high school senior going somewhere. So now that's thrown into the mix. And I wonder if Virginia Tech's going to come around on the NIL side and match some of these other schools that are out there. It just seems like there's a lot more different variables now, especially in the recruiting side, that, you know, how are they going to get this program going and catch up to some of these other schools? They still have to do the way Virginia Tech's always done. They've got to get guys that are maybe a little bit overlooked, maybe not the highest ranked guys, but they fit the system here and they develop those guys. But always over the years, they can always supplement those developmental guys with a few stars in there. And this is the Michael Vicks and D'Angelo Hall and Kevin Jones and Tyrod Taylor, on and on and on this list. Sure. And some guys were stars that were, you know, nobody really looked at. Cam Chancellor, two-star quarterback, whatever he was in high school, developed into that kind of guy. But, you know, I think it's going to be tough. How are they going to get those kind of star players to lead the way and then have the developmental program behind it? Because I think just doing it developmental only is going to be a really tough thing. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for Pry going forward, is navigating this NIL thing and figuring out how to get some of those studs in here. Because if you get some difference makers, that can make up for a lot of deficiencies in other areas.
You know, you're 100% right, Andy. The one thing I said, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is I said to fans on many platforms on Twitter and even on some Twitter spaces, Virginia Tech fans should be very, very fortunate that UVA during that time, when Al Groh came on the scene, then Mike London, who was a phenomenal recruiter at UVA, a young African-American coach who connected with kids in the 757, won a championship at Richmond. But with all that being said, even Bronco, who came in, wholesome guy, fit those UVA values and the whole earn it thing that he going on, breaking the rock. They went to some consecutive bowl games. But overall, in the Commonwealth, a state rich with talent, now not just in Tidewater, but throughout Nova and Richmond and even in Southwest Virginia now, it's no longer back like when I was growing up, the best kept secret. We have Ohio State down here, Clemson. But when it came to the Commonwealth, Virginia never took advantage of Virginia Tech slipping. Virginia Tech was still able to beat them. They never really took hold, not only of the state, but they also went out of state and recruited. ODU and Liberty have made some waves. JMU's doing a great job, but overall, I really feel like Virginia Tech, to some degree, despite our mishaps and us being slow to some things, really dodged a bullet. Because I think if there were some other programs, or maybe if UVA or even ODU or JMU or Liberty really, really wanted to play hardball, even though those are smaller programs, they could have. But I've told people basically, Andy, we never really saw rock bottom.
Right.
And UVA, not that I'm not throwing shade at them or the other schools. I'm just saying that Pry has his work cut out. You're 100% right. You and Danny touched on the landscape of college football, but at the same time, I still think he's in a very winnable on and off the field situation. Does that make sense to you? Or
Yeah, it's not a situation where he's tearing things down to the studs and starting over. You know, you look at Virginia Tech, the worst Virginia Tech team in the last 30 years now, probably that 2018 team.
Yeah.
Either 2018 or last year, I think.
Yeah.
I think last year's team had a little bit more top end talent. You look at the guys that got drafted from that one. 2018 was rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they still beat Virginia somehow. That was the craziest
lucky.
finish.
That was crazy.
That was like 6 different things had to happen in a specific order in the fourth quarter, including like, you know, Stephen Peoples fumbling forward into the end zone and Virginia Tech recovering it.
Yeah.
And then Perkins fumbling the ball in overtime when all they have to do is just come down and easy touchdown to win it. I mean, it's amazing to me that Virginia has not been able to take advantage of this a little bit better. The only time they beat Virginia Tech in that time is when they had, you know, the best player they've had in the last decade.
Yes.
Playing quarterback and the most dynamic guy that they've had there in a long time. And still, it was a close game right down to the finish. Game. So, yeah, I think Virginia Tech has to feel pretty fortunate in that. And, you know, Hokies fans like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world stuff. Like, you haven't seen the end of the world. Like,
no.
I mean, you haven't seen a 2-10 or something like that, or a 3-9.
Right. Yes.
I mean,
I don't want to.
Imagine how Nebraska fans feel right now. Nebraska used to win national championships, and now they're worse than Rutgers in the Big Ten. I mean, you know, as down as it's been at Virginia Tech, has never been that bad.
Well, you mentioned Andy. Sorry to interrupt, but I that's why I wanted you to speak on it, because I'm not a homer. I mean, I'm like the unofficial Tech ambassador. I get all that, but I recognize, like, I have a lot of friends and guys I competed against, and even guys from high school that went to UVA. And I used to be like, man, you guys still are excited. You guys are 1-9 or 4-8, and you are still talking about we can win this game. I can't relate to that, because even last year, and there was some bad moments, I remember that Duke loss. I was at a concert and we got blasted. Andy, I read your story.
It was my lead. It was the lead of my story. You're up there seeing Snoop Dogg and Warren G.
Yeah, Wu-Tang, Wu-Tang Clan. Yeah, and we lost 45-10 to Duke. Worst home loss since '92. And we still went 8-5 that year. We inserted Hendon Hooker and beat Miami, and we're 1 quarter away from winning the Coastal. UVA won it with Perkins, as you mentioned. I just think, we just are spoiled, because honestly, I mentioned the in-state schools, but the ACC itself is a quality conference. But I think if we were in the Big Ten or the SEC, we really would have got stepped on, because those schools really care. Not to say the ACC doesn't about football, but Carolina, even when Mac Brown has, except for a year or so, has underachieved. Georgia Tech is still trying to recover from Paul Johnson. It's just interesting to see how, like, yes, we've had some dark moments, but this isn't rock bottom. Yeah.
Well, think about this. In the last 30 years, they've been bowl eligible every single year. And I know the bowl streak ended in the COVID year, and that was sort of, reasons beyond on the field. I know they were 5-6, but they were still eligible for a bowl game that year, and they chose not to go. But a lot of these schools don't have that choice. A lot of schools are not going to bowl games because they don't have enough wins. They're not good enough to get to these bowl games. And Virginia Tech has always been good enough, at least, to get to a bowl game. And if you're good enough to get to a bowl game, I know there are a billion of them now, and almost everybody makes one. But that means you're not rock bottom. That means you're still middle of the pack at the worst. So, I think some Hokies fans that complain about the direction of the program, I get it. This team has struggled ever since I've been here. It feels like I caught the tail end of that 2011 season when they were really good. And then
that's when you came.
Yeah. So don't blame me for this, by the way. I don't want to hear this as my fault. But I mean, you're still going to bowl games every year. You're still beating your rival almost every year. There's still a lot to like about this program. So I kind of chuckle at these fans. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this program is on the decline and it's not the same." It's like it's not, but it's not. It could be worse. Let's put it that way.
You hit it on the head because in 2011, I went to the ACC championship game and we were going to repeat. We went in 2010. So my wife got me Christmas tickets. A group of us went there to Charlotte. Great place for Tech fans. Clemson limped into that game. I think they lost 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5. They had Taj Boyd, but Dabo was still the interim type guy. And they sat there. I got so tired of hearing their band and fans spell out Clemson after every touchdown. They beat us 30-8. And I remember Bud Foster, might have been talking to you, Andy, or David Teal. He talked about that is when Clemson took control. They took the torch and never looked back. And we struggled. You know, we lost to Michigan the year before in the Sugar Bowl.
Well, that was that year. That was Michigan that year.
Yeah,
because it was back to back. It was Clemson and the Michigan Sugar Bowl. It was almost like that Danny Cole catch non-catch was the moment with like the line of demarcation with the program from really good to not so good. That Clemson game, I think it was 10-10 at halftime.
Yes,
Clemson scored like 3 touchdowns in the first 6 minutes of the third quarter, and it was just
crazy.
It was just over the top, and these receivers were tearing them up, and Virginia Tech couldn't do anything offensively, and then. All those guys leave. All the the 4 offensive linemen graduate, I believe. Danny Cole, Jarrett Boykin, David Wilson leaves. Backup running back name who I'm forgetting leaves as well. I mean, just like all the skill guys. Josh Oglesby.
Oh yeah.
The whole skill set group left, and it was just like Logan Thomas and a pretty good defense still. And that just wasn't enough anymore. Things had changed, and you just didn't have the same kind of. You didn't have the Ryan Williamses and the Eddie Royals in this program offensively that could, even on some bad offensive teams could star in a game and could show up and kind of take it over. It's kind of Logan Thomas. I don't want to say by himself because there were obviously other players out there, but he needed some help in some of those years and just didn't have it. And things just weren't the same. And honestly, that's been my experience at covering this program. But out of that 2016, other than that 2016 season where they won the Coastal, that's the only time I've seen them in a full season get to the ACC championship game.
Yeah.
Well, to take some of the pressure off of Andy, my sophomore year was my first year at Tech, the fall of 2012.
Then it's you. I at least had the end of 2011. They got up to like number 3 in the country that year. So,
yes, trust me.
When I'm glad we got to the who's really to fault at this thing.
Yes, I fully admit. I always say this to my friends. My first year at Virginia Tech was the first year that they went 6-6. So I wear the reason for why Virginia Tech has not quite been the same program.
I'm glad we got to the bottom of this. That's good. Take some blame off of my shoulders.
I talked to Lauren Johnson. You guys know we're close, and he's a phenomenal speaker and great coach in the Virginia High School League. Highland Springs is favored to win the state championship in Class 5A. But he was talking how he went to the ODU game, and of course his son, Braylon, is a Tech commit, one of the high-profile, top-ranked players in the state. And they were at the Boston College game, and he jumped on one of those crazy Twitter spaces with me, Isaiah Ford. It was a bunch of us, J.C. Coleman, James Brooks, Hopkins brothers, and then like 300 Tech fans. We were talking. And of course, I'm the OG, as they call me. And Lauren Johnson was talking about how, Danny, you do this with me, how he was talking about how in 95 we started off 0-2, and he was talking about how the young guys, the young Tech fans or just high schoolers did not realize that Tech has won the ACC 4 times. And then for years, they carried the torch for the best team in the ACC and one of the top 5, top 10, top 12 teams in the country. That's somewhat realistic, but also depressing and sad because, Danny, you're older than my son, but my son and my oldest daughter, who's a freshman at ODU, and even my youngest daughter, who's a 7th grader, they know Tech beats UVA, but they also know we've pretty much been a 7, 8, 6-win team. So hopefully we can turn it around because it's just crazy. Because I'm now that historian talking about, one time we used to own Clemson. Like, no way. I'm like, yeah, man. Like, we used to give Clemson fits, but, it's just crazy. Andy, when you talk about, Tech, you came in 2011. We have grown some. I know Fuente when he flirted with that Baylor job, rumor has it, word has it, that he sat down with Witt and talked about what he needed. And I heard this on the Sons of Saturdays podcast, and they were talking about, in a lot of ways, he did help Tech step their game before he left, because it was obvious, as you mentioned already in the show, that we had some antiquated systems in place. Buff Foster even said a lot of our recruiting letters were outdated. We hadn't even changed some stuff. So in a lot of ways, some of that misery did result into some success and some change. And my question for you is, before we let you go, what is it next? Obviously, winning on field, adjusting to the landscape NIL deal. What do you think's next for them to do or should do as far as getting the program even back to 9-10 wins, like, as far as their program and running it?
Yeah, I think it comes down a lot to the recruiting side. It looks like Pry has a pretty good plan about what he wants, but certainly on defense, trying to find the right guys for that system and guys to slot in. I mean, he's kind of working with some, round pegs and square circles, round peg, but with square holes, however you want to say that phrase. I think he's trying to fit some guys into the system that maybe weren't designed to it because they weren't recruited to this system. So once he starts getting some guys like that, I think that the defense can be even better going forward. But I think the big thing is to figure out what you're doing on the NIL side. And I know people are saying, oh, NIL is not everything in recruiting. It's not. But like I said, when all things are considered even, but the NIL money's not, guys are going to tend to go towards the side with the NIL money. The guy's getting that kind of money. I know it's not supposed to be a recruiting inducement, but it is. Let's be honest with how this whole thing works. The top guys are going to get money like that. And those are the difference makers. And then not all of them. Some will slip through the cracks and be really good at Virginia Tech. And then at that point, you have to retain them. You have to come up with something good so they don't, up and transfer to USC like Jordan Addison did from Pitt, or Jahmyr Gibbs did going from Georgia Tech to Alabama. I'm not going to say that's all NIL induced there, because those are just moving up to major programs in great situations. But you got to figure out a way to retain these guys too. So I just think there are so many more challenges than there were. I'm not going to say it was easy for Frank Beamer, because when you build it for the first time, that is really tough. But then they figured out such a great way to do it and sustain it for such a long time. They kind of had this good thing going in the 757, and nobody knew about all the great athletes down there as much as they do today, where there's publicity for every recruit.
Yep.
So they sort of had that pipeline there. They knew everybody. They got under the radar guys all the time. I don't know if it's easy to do that anymore with how publicized recruiting is, and everybody's got a huddle film and everybody's tweeting. I mean, goodness, I have 800 recruits following me on Twitter and sending me stuff all the time. I'm like, I don't coach for the team, guys. Like, I'm sorry.
I'm glad it's not me. I got I love it because, my numbers are going up, but I have no pull when it comes to guys getting on. I'm worried about my son right now. He's a junior. Yeah. We got to get a look, but I'm with you.
But I just think you've got to figure out the recruiting side of it, because, these other schools are figuring it out. And especially the top tier ones. I mean, you look at I feel like it's consolidating the top talent to like a few schools out there. And that's making it tougher for these middle-class teams like Virginia Tech to keep up, just from a talent perspective. Now, you have to be able to scheme it and coach them up and develop guys, and that can be a great equalizer for this whole thing. But, sometimes it just comes down to a more talented guy goes out there and makes a better play on the field. And there's no degree of coaching that's going to make up for that deficit. And you need some of those guys to be able to
who I'm sorry, Danny, this is my dude, Andy. I love him.
No, go ahead, dude. Yeah.
Who is in the ACC? Obviously Miami, because they had the cachet. And I know next year we scratch the division, so it's just straight up the top two teams. Who's Virginia Tech's biggest threat? Mike and I were talking about Dre Bly in Carolina, even though they have gotten a lot of guys, but I mean, they don't seem to know what to do with them. But I mean, I'm just being honest. I mean, look at the results. Yeah. Is it Carolina? Is it UVA? I mean, who is their biggest threat, in your opinion, in the ACC? Because obviously I played in Big East, and it was UVA, even though we weren't in the same conference. And those years, we were both recruiting the state hard. And to Beamer and Coach Welsh's credit, we both got our players. But is it Carolina for you? I mean, who's Tech's biggest threat?
From a recruiting sense, I do think it's North Carolina. But like you said, they don't develop those guys. They don't do anything with them. I mean, they have how many like blue chip players on that defense? and App State's going up and down the field scoring 60 points. Like App State's a good team. Don't get me wrong. They go down and beat Texas A&M. They shouldn't score 40 points in the fourth quarter against you.
Right.
Like they did against North Carolina in that game.
That's a lot of points.
But just from a recruiting sense, like if you want to win back the state, you've got to start beating Penn State and you've got to start beating North Carolina. These have been the two thorns in their side, just coming across the border and raiding Virginia of its top tier talent. I mean, I think Penn State's got like 4 of the top 10 or something like that, 4 of the top 15 guys in the state. I mean, they've got to put an end to that and win some of these battles. And, somebody might be, Miami. Miami's like that. Miami's always out recruited Virginia Tech.
Always.
Like,
thank you. This is why I got him on. Thank you.
Everybody that's like, Miami's going to win the NIL game. They're going to have such a talented roster. It's like, go back in history and point out a time when Miami hasn't had a more talented roster on paper than Virginia Tech.
Look who I played, bro. I played against all those guys from the U.
This is the thing. I mean, this is how Virginia Tech has to win. Is it's not going to have maybe all the shiny objects at the top of the roster, but they can be a better football team than some of these guys. Miami's been getting all these players for years and has won 1 coastal title since it's been the ACC. So I don't.
I told you the shade.
Yeah. I don't worry about, like, everybody's like, the U is back and they're finally investing. It's like they've had better players before. I'm not looking at Miami going, things are going to be drastically different. But I feel like from a recruiting sense, at least while Mac Brown has been at North Carolina, like Dre Bly has been just killing it in the 757. And I'm not to say all these players have panned out, but you got to start getting some of those guys to Virginia. And maybe Brent Pry coming in from Penn State, cuts a leg off of Penn State and how it recruits across the border. But they've been taking a lot of guys from Northern Virginia. It's like you can't give up these 2 flanks of the state to border schools. You've got to get in there and start winning some of these battles again. At least that's the aim if they're doing this 6-hour radius thing like Frank used to do from Blacksburg. I think that's the path back. And those are the 2 schools that concern me the most.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is I had this very same conversation with Bill Roth not too long ago. I think it might have been around the spring game, Andy, and Penn State came up because you mentioned there being a lot of recruits that end up leaving Northern Virginia for Penn State. Well, there's a lot of Penn State alums up there in Northern Virginia. And so, Northern Virginia, the DMV, if you will, is very transient, I guess. So that you're going to find all sorts of schools up there. Tech, UVA, sure, but like Penn State, you got some folks coming down from some Ivy League schools too. It's a weird thing. So I mean, the recruiting has obviously been something to me that's been obvious. You have to get back because not that every great player Tech has come from Virginia, but a lot of them have, but they're emphasizing that they're taking all the steps. They're well aware that they need to start getting some of these guys to come to Blacksburg.
Yeah, I think it's a process. I mean, they're coming in this 2023 class. I mean, when Pry was hired, I think 3 of the top 10 commitments in the 2023 class, the one that has not yet signed, were already committed to Penn State. When he was hired, I mean, that's where he's coming in on. So you're at a deficit already in terms of relationships and, building a bond with these types of players. And I think you are for this class in 2023 coming up, even 2024 might not be easy because you got to get on these guys when they're like freshmen in high school, maybe even before that, to really be ahead of the game. So it'll be a real challenge because I think they're working from behind a little bit here. But from what I've seen, some of the reactions they've got from people around the state, it seems like they're doing a pretty good job on that front.
Yeah, Andy, I appreciate you jumping on, man. I said maybe like a few minutes, but we kept you longer than what I said. But then again, my other guest, I think practice ran long for them, so this has actually been good because I love talking to you. Not because we see the same things the same way. It's more so because, you have great insight and you've been covering the sport a long time and also just love your work, man. I'm a big fan of yours, man. So I appreciate you for jumping on, man.
I think on the length of time that I've interviewed you versus the time you've interviewed me tonight, you're still way up. So you have plenty more time. You can probably talk to me for another 6 hours.
Listen,
I might have you both beat there though, because I've interviewed both of you every week for 3 years.
Yes.
So, I'm just saying.
Andy's that dude, man. I love it, man. Like he's one of the guys I check. I mean, all the time. As soon as I go to Twitter, I look at the press conference stuff, and I look at his stuff on the Athletic. Even back when before you joined the Athletic, you were with the
Roanoke Times.
Roanoke Times. Yeah, so I was reading it back then, man. That's so weird too, man. Like I can't keep up. Like David Teal, he's with you now too, right? The Athletic, right?
He's at the Times-Dispatch in Richmond.
Okay, my fault. But I just
Barber.
remember like this was crazy because David Till covered me in high school, and
Yeah,
and
it
he was
feels
with the
weird for
Daily
him
Press.
not to be in the Daily Press
It's just
anymore.
weird,
He's been
man.
for 30 years. It's like, well,
y'all talk about conference realignment. It's happening with the journalists too,
yeah,
man.
it's
Like,
like
I mean, it's just,
David Teal at the Times-Dispatch is like USC in the Big Ten. It's like it
yeah,
just doesn't feel right. It's
yeah.
not right. It
Well,
doesn't feel
hold
right.
on,
Same
hold
great
on.
quality, but it just doesn't feel right.
Right.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask you this because, like I said, my other guest, I think he couldn't make it. We'll get him next time, and then we'll let you go after this. You mentioned the NIL and conference realignment, and the new age of football. You know, for the record, and just to let you and Danny know, I am not the old man get off my lawn. I'm loving the new age. I'm not against conference realignment. I just hope some of the natural rivalries don't get lost, or at least, like I didn't like the fact that you saw me on Twitter, both you guys follow me. I was advocating for us to keep that Miami Tech game. But is it a good or bad thing with the new age occurring in college sports? Because basketball, my son's a hooper, he's getting recruited and he's a D1 prospect. It's different. Um, is it a bad thing that what we talked about this last 40 minutes about the new age and money and everything, or is it just come somewhere in between?
I think it just kind of is what college football is. And I think people are talking about it like, oh my gosh, this realignment is crazy. It's like, go back in history and look at some of the realignment out there in like the Southwest Conference and then the Big 12. I mean, the Big 12 is not some ancient conference we're talking about here. You come back to like 1994 or something like that. I mean, that's not that long. I mean, I was in middle school at that point. I'm not that old. But, you know, Penn State used to be an independent. Florida State used to be an independent. South Carolina used to be like it's just the things were just have been shifting for a long, long time. So I think it'll change, and we'll get used to it, and then it'll change some more, and we'll talk about how ridiculous it is that it's changing again. But a big picture about it, my concern about it is these conferences are getting so big and so bloated that people are talking about going up to 24 teams or something like that. If you have 24 teams, then you're basically two conferences. You're gonna have to split it up into 12 and 12 at least, or split it up in some way, and then it's not going to feel like you're even in the same conference with those other schools. So it's like, if the ACC gets any bigger, pretty soon they're going to split it up and go, all right, we're going to go to the old Big East and then the old ACC. It's like, well, what did you accomplish then? This is what it was 20 years ago. You're just splitting up the teams the same way. So, I think at a certain point, they just become so big and so unwieldy that, games like Virginia Tech, Miami don't get played every year. That's a crime. That should happen every year.
Huge crime. A huge crime.
It sounds like Miami didn't want to. It wasn't a priority for Miami. But at the same
Well,
time, the ACC needs to step in and go, too bad. We need you two playing. We need both of your programs to be good, and we need both of you playing every year for the good of the ACC and the good of the ACC's contract.
They have their reasons. They know why.
Yeah, Miami. I mean, you can't let some of these schools dictate this thing. I thought how they set it up where it's like one absolute, you have to play Virginia in Virginia Tech's case, then one geographical one, which is Wake Forest, which I thought was a dumb. Like, there's just no history there. I know they're close, but like, come on now.
Terrible.
We're getting on planes to go everywhere at this day and age. Like, we don't need to worry about geography that much. And then one, they were just sort of like pieced it together. And it's like, I just don't think they did a good job with setting up the parents. On my idea, by the way, I wrote about this in 2013. I was the first one that I know that published this idea with the 3-5 model. So I'm taking
they stole it. Yes, I saw you. They stole it.
That's fine. They can steal it as long as I get a little bit of credit for it. Right. I've told the commissioner, Jim Phillips, the Athletic, myself and Matt Fortuna had a little sit down with him at the ACC kickoff. I'm like, that was my idea that you guys are doing with this thing.
You did, yeah.
So don't screw it up. And then what do? They screw it up.
They screwed it up
with the matchups. But I'll give them a little bit of credit. It's tough to do. The first time I did it, I wasn't happy with the matchups. But getting back to your original point about expansion, like I think that's what's lost in this thing is, these conferences change, and then all of a sudden Texas isn't playing Texas A&M every year. Missouri's not playing Kansas every year, I don't think, anymore. Nebraska is not playing Oklahoma all the time. Like, it's just these games that should be played all the time aren't getting played. And when you're going to be like, oh, we're going to play 9, 10 conference games, that's just going to squeeze it out even more. You're not going to have room to play these. The backyard brawl. Pitt and West Virginia hadn't played in like 9 years or 10 years when they played the other day. And how great was that game? That was an awesome game.
Loved it.
It took me back, man.
That should be an every year game. And I think that's what's lost in this whole thing. And I know it's all about money and you got to get the most revenue so you can pay these coaches ridiculous buyouts when they're not good, because that's where all this money feels like it's going. Lavish facilities and stuff like this. They're not paying the players with it. They're just building lavish facilities and paying administrators and coaches and all this stuff. But, everybody's in a race to get more money, and I understand that. But I think they need to stop and look at their product and look at why people like this stuff. They like to see, Pitt play West Virginia. They like to see USC play Stanford. Is USC going to play Stanford every year once they go to the Big Ten? We'll see. But these are games that need to be played all the time, and it's just not happening. I think that's the big loss in this whole deal.
Yeah. We had Ray Lewis on the Vic 757 show last year, along with D Hall and Ty Washington, and previewing the Miami matchup last year. And he came out and said Tech is one of their rivals, and he remembers losing to Tech for the first time. Actually, I met Ray when Todd was coaching with the Ravens, and Tyrod was the backup to Flacco. And Todd got me some tickets. I talked to Ray Lewis about the Tech-Miami rivalry game in the parking lot after a win. And that rivalry, for a lot of us, that played during those days, was probably bigger than the UVA game. I mean, Miami and West Virginia were bigger rivalry games for a long time than UVA. And this is even back when UVA and Tech were both ranked consistently, and both were really good programs. And Miami and Tech just always, except for a game or two here, was really a great. I mean, a lot of people nationally know about that rivalry game, but it is what it is, man. Andy,
well, consider this real quick. Consider this: last 30 years, Virginia Tech, Miami, 15-15. That's the record.
We got a nugget. Dude, you should have DM'd me that when I was advocating hard this summer. I did not know that. 15-15.
So this year's game is a big one because they're not going to play going forward every year. So whoever wins this one has bragging rights on that. But they're like getting rid of that so that Virginia Tech can play Wake Forest or Pitt. Like, I like Pitt. I don't know if it needs to be an every year game.
I like Pitt
so Miami can play Louisville and Boston College. Like, what sense does that make? Let's change this thing.
Yeah, that game too. Hopefully we haven't fallen off a cliff, but that game is going to be electric. I remember Fuente his first year when they won the Coastal. They beat Miami that year 37-16. And I was getting a lot of texts, from a lot of former players. We have a lot of group chats, and they were like, hey, this is like the old days, because Miami was good that year. Tech obviously won the Coastal, but the crowd, I think it was a Thursday night game.
I think didn't they sack Brad Kaya like 8 times?
Yes.
And a couple, Kenna Canaan was out, and I think another defensive lineman was out, and then all these young guys like Mahota had a big game, and all these other guys played really well, and it was like, okay,
it was really good. That game
is what it used to be like.
Thank you so much for that stat, because I'm gonna keep that in my back pocket when I get on Tech and Twitter and talk trash. I did not know it was. I should have looked that up, but I guess sometimes they win 2 in a row, we win 1. You think they might have been, but 30 years is even. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty even. That's a game that should be played. Fix it, ACC. Come on.
Andy, man, I appreciate you. Me and Danny both appreciate you jumping on, man. I love talking with you, man. We'll have you on again, man. And also hopefully we can try to fit you in on the show we do with Mike as well. Hopefully after some good news with Tech. It's always better to talk about wins and moving forward versus, should we bench this guy, fire this guy? I'm not a fan of that. I don't do the whole shock radio or TV like skipping them. That's not my thing.
It's all right.
But no, thank you again for jumping on, man. I appreciate you, man. What do you got coming up for the people checking this out? What do you got coming up?
Just the full week of great coverage on The Athletic. I don't know. We just got the interview guys tonight, so I think I'll write something on the defensive line at some point this week. I'll have a mailbag. It's tough to get up for a game like Wofford. It's not like you have a bunch of special stories planned.
It's at 11 a.m.
Yeah,
It's at
yeah.
11 a.m.
I love it. I love it. It's great for me as a writer.
Sports writer paradise.
Oh, I love it. I get back for all the night games.
Hey, I'm going to
all the fans hate it when I say that because they're like, I got to tailgate at like 7 a.m. I'm like, I don't care. I get out of there by like 4 o'clock. This is great. Best thing ever. But
so I'm going to the
after that. I'm working on something. So hopefully we get something good there.
I'm going to the Wisconsin game this weekend, gentlemen. I'm not going to be at the Tech game, but I will be at the Wisconsin game. Wisconsin just got upset by Washington State last week. So me and my girlfriend.
I'm a Wisconsin graduate. I don't even know who they're playing.
I was like, I'm pretty sure Andy actually went to Wisconsin. They play someone that's not very good this weekend. Hang on, I had it right in front of me. New Mexico State.
I was a sophomore student in the crowd the first time they played jump around.
Really?
They were playing Purdue. Drew Brees threw it like 84 times in that game. Wow. And right at the end of the third quarter, he threw a pass that Jamar Fletcher picked off and took back for a touchdown. And the place was like a tinder box at that point. Yeah. And like a minute later, they played jump around. I think I ended up like 5 rows in front of where I started when that. I mean, it was a madhouse. like fans.
That's crazy.
Pretty well lubricated for that night game like that. But so that's my my little tidbit on Wisconsin. And I was there for the birth of jump around.
Hopefully we can get more credible, man. So teams will want to play us again because we were supposed to play them, Michigan, and I even back when I played, and right after I played, Ron Dane and Mike and Joey Hamilton were Heisman finalists. And as an old lineman, I talked glowingly about like how they ran the ball. Like oh my God, Wisconsin. And to me, we always talked amongst ourselves back during those days at Tech in the late 90s and early 2000s that Wisconsin was somewhat the Big Ten version of us. Yeah. And we always respected them. And I even root for them when they're, really good. But Ohio State always has so many athletes when they get to that Big Ten championship game. But great place. They're on my bucket list to see a game.
Well, hopefully in 2032, whenever they're supposed to play that game, it can actually go through. It's been delayed for like 3 decades, but hopefully they finally play that game coming up.
Yeah, please, because I miss. That's one thing, fans get on. Oh, we got to start playing these great teams. I'm like, no, we need. I'm with that Bronco Mendenhall. We need winnable games right now. We don't need to be playing LSU. This is not your uncle's Hokies. Not till Pride gets it right. I just think it's okay to have realistic expectations, man. I mean, you look at Georgia and these teams now, it's not even about the NIL with them. They just have loads of talent, and hopefully Pride will get us there. But Andy, again, thank you so much for jumping on, man. We appreciate you. I'll be checking for you, and I'll get you back on. As always, I'm on retainer if you need me for the historical perspective. I got you, my guy.
Well, anytime you guys want to have me, I'd be glad to come on here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, man.
Good Salute. To see you, Andy.
Thank you. Take care. Man. That's Andy Bitter of The Athletic, man, joined us on the Vicktory Life Legacy Podcast. We appreciate him jumping on, man. So, Danny, we're going to move real quickly to Hokie shout-outs. Not Hokie shout-outs. That's the other show. Sorry. Vicktory Life Legacy Spotlights. We want to spotlight some people. This has been a great show. The other guest that we had that was supposed to come on couldn't make it, but at the same time, he just texted me. For those wondering, I'll just tell you, we were supposed to have Braylon Johnson on, the Highland Springs commit. He was supposed to get out of practice at 7:15, 7:20. He even checked with his dad. And then, of course, knowing Lauren Johnson, he's a Virgo like me. He's headstrong. He wants to win every game. Practice ran long. So Braylon said he'll jump on next time. So definitely want to get him on to talk about what he thought about Tech against not just Boston College, but he had one of the greatest. If you haven't seen it, he had a great commit video. It was like a little mini movie, and it just showed all the legacies of the DBU players at Tech, and including his dad, and then showed him training and working out. I know sometimes these young kids get a bit much. It's almost like a Spielberg production just to commit to Coastal Carolina, but at the same time, I love seeing kids get excited about going to the next level in college because having a daughter and a son and another daughter and kids I mentor, that's their dream. That's their goal. So they should do it up. They should get turned up. They should make videos. I'm all for it, man. I mean, I'm good. I mean, I don't wish I had all this social media growing up because we were off the chain. But at the same time, I know with my personality and what I'm good at now, I would have had a bunch of TikTok followers and I would have had a bunch of skits and pranks because we were crazy back in the bird. You know what I'm saying? Me and Pearson Prelo and all of us, we were out of control. But nothing bad, people listening and watching, nothing bad. But we just had a phenomenal time. But Danny, we're at this segment. Andy was gracious enough to stay on a lot longer than what I had told him, but he was great, man. And if you haven't anybody watching or listening on SoundCloud, just make sure that you check Andy Bitter out, especially tech fans. He's a great writer. He gives great insight. But we're at the end of the show where we want to shout out our legacy spotlights. These are people, not necessarily Virginia Tech people. They can be from anywhere, any walk of life. We want to highlight something they've done for the community to create a better world, a better place to live in, whether it be mental health, education, medicine. Danny, who is your legacy spotlight?
Well, my legacy spotlight is actually somebody that I have spotlighted relatively recently, I think. But I saw this, Dwight, and there was no way that I couldn't shout it out again because it's just really cool. So we all know Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver for the Washington Commanders. Caught a touchdown yesterday. Big win for the Commanders in the dub over the Jacksonville Jaguars. But Terry McLaurin, he's an incredible dude off the field. As incredible as he is on the field, he's probably a better dude off the field. I saw this from the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, the OGVP, and they're on Twitter at OGVPDCGov for anybody that wants to check it up. But it was earlier today. They tweeted out, quote, "Building blocks granted a glance. Terry McLaurin, wide receiver for the Commanders, plans to celebrate his birthday today by honoring foster families. Please ensure you RSVP for location details." So he's helping disadvantaged children and doing this as a way to celebrate his birthday. He's going to go. He went and made a public appearance. That dude just is the epitome of a leader, if you ask me. I know that I've shouted him out very recently, shortly after he got his contract extension, because he put out after that a very well thought out and heartfelt letter to the Washington fans, stating his commitment to the team. And I just thought that was really cool. But this just an act of humility, and to go out into the community and help kids. It doesn't get any better than that, if you ask me, especially when you talk about disadvantaged kids who might be at some sort of risk for gun violence. So my legacy spotlight, Scary Terry McLaurin.
I love it. Mine is actually, I was going to shout out Nikki Giovanni because she's retiring from Virginia Tech, and we know she's the great poet. She's a phenomenal leader, speaker, just amazing woman. But I'm actually going to go with somebody I saw on Twitter this morning. I am not a Jets fan by any means, but I believe his name is DJ Reed, the defensive back. They were playing the Ravens. And I was trying to find and make sure. So I want to make sure. I apologize if I mispronounced his name or I said something wrong. But the Jets were playing the Ravens. The Ravens obviously won that game. Lamar did what Lamar does. But on one of the plays, he threw an interception. And the DB for the Jets, Reed, TJ, I think that's his name, got the interception and ran to the middle of the field to honor his dad. He threw his hands up and he kneeled down and he honored his dad. And people were, of course, talking about on social media, talking about how, it was classless. You're losing by 20 something or 18 points. Why would you do that? And, basically he was just saying that, I looked it up. DJ Reed, I was right. He, if you haven't seen it, I just want to tell everybody, go to Twitter, Instagram, or even Facebook and look it up. But he was interviewed by one of the CBS reporters after the game, and they were like, "A lot of people are talking about you." And he said, "That was a tribute to my dad. I found out my dad passed away before the game."
Wow, dude, no, that's
before
horrible.
the game. Before the game. So he didn't. He went to the field. He threw his hands up and kneeled in on the logo, and everybody was booing him. Or some people were like, watching the game and they were tweeting. And you and I have dads, and I'm a dad. And I'm older than you. And my dad is still here. He's in his 70s. But, it hit me. It hit me watching the interview, because having 3 children and having a father and a father-in-law, when you have a father or anybody in your life you love, it's special. So it's crazy how you got to be careful when you misjudge or misinterpret some things, because social media has given us that access where we can judge people or make preconceived notions or assume things before we really know the whole story. So I just wanted to shout that dude out, man, not because he made a great pick. It was actually a great interception, too. I didn't have money on the game. I don't gamble, but I just thought that was amazing. The fact that he was able to play a game and finding out moments before the game his father died.
That's
Just
crazy.
unbelievable, man.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
that's a great legacy shout out, man. Well done.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
wild.
So anyway, great show tonight. I just want to thank everybody for continuing to support Daniel and I. We're back as well, not just with the Vicktory Life Legacy Podcast, but we also have Danny Nokes who'll be on 106.7 The Fan. He's overcoming COVID. He'll also be on with me. Actually, we're recording Wednesday night this week. The Vic 757 show, episode 3, season 2 of that. So we're going to have another great show. He's going to come on as Nokes. So continue to subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the Vic 757 show. And like we say every episode, on behalf of Danny Nokes and I want to say, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, make sure you have a positive impact and you leave a great legacy, man. Thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, we appreciate you.